Are there other demons that look the way you do? Akaza peered up at me from under his thick pink lashes. The small fire we'd set up by the river after yet another night of training had lit his usual glowing eyes into even more intimidating and alluring gaze. He raised a brow, sniffing his position against the log we both perched against. My legs rested near my chest, and I turned my head against my knees to look up at him. What do you mean by that? He turned to look at me, taking his gaze away from the fire. I shrugged, humming to myself while I thought, I don't know. I suppose you're just different from the other demons I've encountered so far. My eyes scanned from his pink hair and slowly down his half-naked body. The way you look, it's so interesting. His brows scrunched up together slightly at my word. Is that so? He said, seemingly not interested in the conversation. That didn't bother me, though. I was happy, sitting here with him by the fire. My training seemed to be going well, even more so than normal, and it finally allowed me to believe that maybe I could atone for the way I'd been before, and maybe, just maybe, there was a chance I could succeed. The fire sparked, the embers and ash floating around our two figures. The white scarf I wore proved to be an even more comfortable feeling. As well, I meant what I said. Something about him had always irritated me. It was enjoying watching him scanning the area around us, the flames dancing in his labeled eyes. I said, our eyes locking together once more. That arose another question I felt as though I always wished to ask. Your eyes, I begun, and he tilted his head. One of his habits I began to pick up on. They say upper 3. What does that mean? He stared at me for a moment, shifting his immortal stillness once again. Did the question make him uncomfortable somehow? Akaza then looked away and back towards the fire with a long breath, opening his mouth to reply. Well, I'm not exactly entirely sure how to explain it. I waited patiently for his information, keeping my cheek rested on its side as I watched him, unaware of anything else in that moment. He smiled, crossing his legs underneath him as one of his blue-tipped hands began to play with some of the grass we were sitting on. My attention went towards the action for a moment, until he began speaking again. I suppose you could understand, actually. I glanced back to him. You have a master, don't you? I nodded. I thought so, he breathed. Well, I do as well. He casted his eyes towards me, and I could tell he was attempting to feel out his reaction towards his words. My mouth was pushed to one side as I tried to hide my smile. I figured as much. His eyes lit up slightly. Did you know? Akaza asked in a smile, one of his sharp teeth lighting up against the fire's warm light. You also have rankings in the world of assassin, and I admit that it's practically the same for us demons. I stared, waiting for him to finish. He stared back at the fire. My eyes are labeled as upper 3 because it reveals that I am ranked as the 3rd strongest by my master. Oh, really? He frowned for a second, peering back at me. You think I'm lying? My brows shot up as insecurity showing. I lifted my head, laughing out loud. No, don't worry. I believe you. I laughed. It's only a little shocking, that's all. How so? It was my turn to look towards the flames, basking in its warmth it gave off. Shrugging, I respond honestly. It's interesting that though we have so different, human and demons by that standards, yet we still run by a similar set of rules. I exhaled deeply, and Akaza didn't reply. By the time I turned back to him, his gaze was set on where mine had just been, no emotion written upon his face for once. However, I added, gaining his attention once more when my voice became a bit more of a tense. A tease. You should be aware that aside from my own master, I am the number 1 in my ranking, I stated nonchalantly. So technically, that would make me A shrike laugh interrupted me, a laugh I'd never heard from him before. It was enough to halt my words before I could even finish. It was a laugh that sounded human, I suppose. It wasn't malicious. It was genuine. "Don't you dare say better," he said, shaking his pink head with an annoyed chuckle. It took me a second to get over the feeling that overtook me before I gave him an exasperated look. "Excuse me," I said, and he gave me a teasing look. "Due to the fact that I haven't died during all of our training, I'd say that makes me quite better than your average human." He grinned. You're quite right about that." I smiled with a sigh, closing my eyes and turning to face the fire, absorbing the warmth it gave off. Since silence fell between us, and since at first I started to believe the conversation had ceased, only then did he ask something randomly. "How long?" He cleared his throat, his velvety tone flooding back. "How long have you been an assassin?" My eyelids flicker open at his question, and I gave him an odd sidelong glance, and for some reason, looking into his glowing eyes, a habit I begin to develop myself, my sister's warm smile flashed. My chest tightened, and I gave him the truth. "As long as I can remember," I started. Training was more like a second nature to me. At a young age, I was actually my mother who... My eyes closed while I took a shaking breath. My mother was the one who forced me into the preposition. She had been an assassin herself, having personal ties to my master. Though my eyes were set on the demon beside me, I felt a stare upon my figure as I spoke. At first, I hadn't wanted anything to do with it. In a way, it felt like what I believed being sent to hell would feel like. Golden memories flushed. As brutal as your training is, nothing could compare to what I remember from all those years ago. The fire seemed to ignite even further at my words, emphasizing the way I felt. My brother, he had refused to follow my mother's footsteps, and my eldest sister, well, a soft smile graced my lips. She was far too kind, too gentle for such a profession, enough so that my mother hadn't even bothered to convince her, knowing it was futile. A slow exhale escaped my mouth, the crisp night air fogging before my eyes. Considering those two factors, the job was left to me. It became my duty. At first, though, I hadn't cared much for it, never put much energy into it, but then your sister became ill. Akaza finished, my heart stopping in my chest for a moment at his quiet words. The lost strands of hair blew past my face as I turned towards him, lifting my head off my knees with a light, wider eyes. For some strange reason, I had never expected Akaza to remember that little fact. I suppose that I even figured he forgot all about it, the word I'd once shouted at him. He never questioned it until now. After a few shocking moments, I nodded, breaking away from his powerful stare. Years ago, yes, she became sick. Something in my chest began to tighten in some strange and painful way, making it difficult to speak about the matter. On that note, I fell silent, not feeling the need to continue any further. Besides, I'd given Akaza far more information about my life than I expected to, and in fact, it was more than I'd ever given to anyone else. The demon next to me must have recognized the way I grew silent, not protesting about it any further, which was something I greatly appreciated. And so, surprisingly, he changed the subject. "What about the rest of your life?" he inquired, his sultry voice ever so quiet. I frowned, not knowing what he meant by that. I must have said my confusion thoughts out loud, for he tilted his head with his own frown. "I mean, the part of your life that wasn't dedicated to killing and training." I didn't know how to answer it. All I could do was stare at him, trying to read his emotions in his eyes, something he began to do with me as well. What was I supposed to say? There was hardly anything I could remember. Nothing worth noting. Time spent with my sister? Well, that was memorable, but in a way, the most I could recall were times where I would visit her after she became sick. to spend time with her before my next mission. For as long as I could remember, my focus had always been entirely dedicated to that. You're a human. You don't have any passions? Hobbies? The part of me that kept completely hidden sparked at the soft words staring at my heart. In the process, well, my face grew hot, not just from the fire, but from the embarrassment that began to grow at the fact that I couldn't find anything to respond with. What about you, then? I asked, turning the question back towards him. Even as a demon, you must have passions and hobbies yourself. Akaza looked away, leaning back further against the log we were up against. Shaking his head, his voice turned a bitter cold, with a hint of melancholy to it. No, my only wish, the only goal I've ever had, was to grow stronger. He snapped, the coldness vanishing when he must have sensed his change in demeanor. So he added, similar to you, I assume. A deep frown etched onto my features as I huffed. I guess you're right, about one thing then. We really are similar than I thought. Silence for a few seconds. Indeed we are. I smiled at the thought, for some strange reason, feeling comforted by it. At least I wasn't the only one. There was someone else like me out there. Someone who could understand the reason I did that, and I wouldn't be judged for it. Despite being a demon, Akaza probably understood me more than anyone ever had. It wasn't as concerning to me as it should have been. Good. Pinned underneath the demon, his grip on my arms that were being lifted over my head were finally set free from his unrevealing grin. He grinned, the kind of smile that would only appear at the excitement of sparring together, which we hadn't in what felt like such a long time now. Your reflexes are becoming much more compatible, Yin. He laughed, and I was on my feet before he could attack. It was becoming easier now, whether it was the new space for the new set of mind. I felt my own progress growing with each and every passing day we spent together. I almost began to lose track of how long we'd been in the city now, but still aware that it only been about a week now. The time around, I also began to learn more about him in general, through both his mental and physical actions. I blocked two first hits, his fighting patterns becoming more and more evident. Of course, he switched it up from time to time, and also definitely wasn't his usual full potential. In fact, I could tell it wasn't even close, but I tried not to let that fact distract me from my thoughts. I promised that I would do better, to take into consideration the advance he'd given me so long ago. Take a hold of your emotions, hone them into your own weapon to use against him. I could do that. We danced, and each with him getting more hits than I could ever possibly block. I grinned, finding myself actually missing the way we used to fight. Even now, I could feel my own improvement, and his words and courage helped me as well. Well, I breathed, flying back. I think they were always this good. You just haven't noticed until now. I teased, both of us knowing full well that wasn't the truth. But his excitement was contagious. I supposed he'd been like this before, but back at the old other house, I'd been too much of a blind idiot to notice it, to focus on him. But now I supposedly realized that I'd never seen him so exhilarating and filled with emotion. In fact, he almost seemed like a different person. But as we continued to fight, dodging and punching and kicking and striking, another fact came to my mind continuously. Akaza was excited. For me, he was ecstatic about my improvement, commanding me for any time I could dodge him when he was pulling a move he never would have expected me to be able to dodge. Excellent, he yelled, his canines being revealed in a smile as he came up to me with two mid-air kicks. One I hardly missed by the hair. We were in a close range now, and I couldn't keep my smile off my face either. I wasn't sure if it was simply adrenaline, but as Akaza's words kept flowing into me, it felt like his voice was sharpening the way I could move now, as though it was taking hold of my body with each movement of praise and palliation to my stance and attacks. It was a beautiful sensation, and the moment I simply couldn't get enough of. It felt as though he couldn't either, because now I wanted to unleash everything I had. I wasn't sure why. It was never something I'd felt much more of before. Now, I simply wanted to let go. It felt fleeting, fighting in this pattern with him, his golden eyes, the eyes that used to mock me for hours on end before, now only showing signs of praise, of congratulation. It made me realize that I didn't just need to be more powerful. I wanted to be more powerful. Because this feeling, it was utterly breathtaking. I laughed along with him, not even sure how long we'd been practicing now. Minutes, hours. It felt like I could go on forever and never tire of this, even if my body was screaming for me to have a break. I loved it, and each day I grew to love it more. I never expected such a feel of intensity. And the way Akaza was filled with such the same feeling, I almost forgot about everything that had led to this. The reason I was here in the first place. Yes, amazing. My own attack cut off his words, and he choked at the hit I dealt in his windpipe supposedly. He staggered back a few steps, his eyes wide and pink brows raised halfway up his tattooed forehead. I gave him one of his grins he always used to give me after delivering such a blow. The kind of hits that would leave me so full of rage that my vision would turn red. Now, if he were to ever succeed in such attacks against me, I would not think twice about the way it made me feel. If I felt angry, I used it to create my own weapon, to increase my internal and exterior strength the way he taught me. I was breathing heavily, and though he was hardly out of breath himself, for some reason, I felt as though I had won. By delivering such an expected hit on him, essentially since it was placed, I'd never struck before. It was a feeling I truly never felt and couldn't forget. Akaza's eyes bored into me, smiling at me with such emotion I recognized was pride. He was proud. Ignoring the way that made me feel, I swallowed, turning away from him entirely, pretending to walk over to our temporary camp under the canopy of trees. I bent down to shuffle through the bag he always brought me, for one containing food and drinks and bits of clothing to change into after the night. And for some reason, the sight of that didn't help the ache in my chest. "You've done well, Yen," he said, voice so proud, so close, even though it allowed me to know that he was standing directly behind me. "The way you've been improving is beyond what I expected from you." His scent washed over me at the same time his breath danced across the back of my neck. "Well," I said, straightening my back as closeness, "I learned from the best, didn't I?" I said, turning to him with a smile that would hopefully mask the way his praise made me feel. He grinned to himself. "Very true." I began to grab the usual bottle of water he brought and began to take a long sip of it, ceasing to realize the way the water began to spill out and down my chin. My face turned towards the side. I eyed Akaza, almost pausing my drinking when I realized where his gaze was set. Upon my exposed throat, the water dripping down it as I drank. His eyes flashed with something I couldn't entirely pick up on in the way my shocked state of mind. I finished it off in one huge breath, and his eyes went straight to my mouth at the same time, watching me intently as I tried to connect my breath once more until after drowning the water. The way he was looking at me, I didn't have it in me to ask what that was supposed to meant, whether or not it was still him wishing to devour me or if it meant something entirely different. "Is that it for tonight, then?" I asked, and his eyes shot straight for my own as quickly in a flash of lightning. He grabbed the bag from me with a little aggression than normal. I had to prevent myself from jumping back at the action. "Yeah," he stated, already beginning to walk away. "Let's just head back into the house. Are you hungry?" he asked, turning slightly as he moved away. I ignored his odd behavior, nodding in response before jogging to catch up with him at the mentioning of food, suddenly finding myself dispartition to the back. Can we get some?" I asked, side-eyeing him. He frowned at me for a singular angle. "We? I thought my cooking was terrible." I laughed, scoffing. "It is, trust me, but I can always show you how to get better." He shook his head even as I said no, but then he took a hold of my hand the same way he did always when we went back somewhere together. Our fingers interlocked in a way that felt so normal now. "You are training with me after all. It's only fair that I train you in something in return, right?" I asked, finishing my words with a devilish grin. "Learning to cook doesn't seem to be very useful to me," he said, not sounding very excited at my offer. "In fact, I don't see a point. It sounds like more of a waste of time, if anything. I glowed, almost tripping due to my lack of attention to what we were beforing until he caught me, adjusting my pace quickly as we continued, and I ignored it, referring back to what he said before. A waste of time, I exclaimed, pushing my embarrassment back at what he had just said. Considering the fact that you're still alive for 2 centuries, one would believe you are more than enough time to spare. He rolled his eyes. Fine. If you insist on teaching me how to cook such useless meals for no benefits for my own whatsoever, then let's do it, as long as it'll keep you from whining about it this point forward. I raised a brow as insult and answer, supposing that it was the best I could ask for, because in all honesty, I knew that he'd no use for human food. But the truth of the matter was that I really just wanted to cook with him merely for the fun of it. Also because the thought of a demon such as him cooking was practically hilarious to me. I suppose that, in a way, a part of me also wished to cook again for myself, having missing the way I used to do it so with one person I love most in the world. I hadn't been able to make our special dish together the last time. Maybe I could learn to create a new meaning for it now. Maybe Akaza could help with that, the way he was helping me with everything else in my life, seemingly.